for you to be able to get it if you would like, or send me an email and I can, or do this better. Put your email in the chat and
Going. All right. If you look there on your outline on the 21 laws of leadership, and just a few things there on your notes. I do want you to notice at the last page on those notes is a typed version of those 21 laws. Just to let you know, my notes are pretty rough. They'll be edited and sent out later. But I encourage you to look at these. And in this class, what I've done is I have them on a board right next to my chair at home. And I can refer to them over and over because one of the goals is to just memorize these, just to kind of think, okay, this law would apply to this particular situation, and very powerful way to use these tools. Let me just give you a personal background on my story um, with leadership. I know for you who are younger, everything you hear about leadership today, but it wasn't so when I was in my younger days. There was a lot of talk about management and administration. Uh, but most people in my day, early days, thought, well, you're either a leader or you're not. And so you would say, I'm going to talk about leadership. They would say, never mind, I'm not a leader. I'm just an employee or whatever. And so when the Lord raised up John Maxwell, this was a really a revolution in the church that maybe people can't appreciate today. But my story is going all the way back to 1987, and I was a pastor. And as I began the church, and I was running as fast as I can to be a pastor, I realized that so much of the ministry was organizing things, administrating things, setting up schedules and systems. And I had already concluded I am not good at that. And I was just literally, I'm called to minister. And for me, a minister meant I'm a preacher. And I'll pray for people and I'll lay hands on the sick and I'll go visit people in the hospital. But quite quickly, I realized, wow, uh, I'm not doing much of that. I've got all of this. And I remember very clearly complaining to the Lord. I said, Lord, I am not good at this administration leadership stuff. And what I was really praying was, would you please bring someone else to do this? Because I don't like this. I don't have any gift at this. And I just said, Lord, could you please help somebody else do this? And I was waiting for God to give me this revelation. I am sending you, Aaron, to hold up your arms or something like that. And he spoke two words to me. It was, get good. I said, I'm not good. He says, you got to get good. And I did not realize, but at that same time in my life, God was already going to switch my role. That was the first year that I would go to the Philippines. And I would be so surprised because if you would have known me as young, there was a song that they used to sing, which is Little Country Church on the Edge of Town. And all I ever had a dream, I just want to be a pastor of a little country church on the edge of town. And then God shows me, no, you're going to pastor nations. You're going to go to nations and help churches around the world. Well, I didn't realize it at that time. What he was really telling me is the level of leadership I was walking in, I could not do his next assignment. It was at the same time I got invited to go to this John Maxwell leadership seminar in California. It was a great seminar, John Maxwell, Rick Warren, and I had not heard of either one of them. And I get over there, and immediately he begins to say very quickly that everything rises and falls on leadership. Uh, you cannot you cannot influence more people if you don't grow more in your leadership. And there was just this awareness, Dale, you've got to learn a bunch of new tools for the next assignment that you have in life. And this is where I first began to learn about these laws of leadership. And so I've been studying this ever since. And after now, however many that years that is, I can tell you, I believe everything rises and falls on leadership. I can just see it over and over. Uh, as the leader goes, the organization, as Rick Warren said, I remember that very first time he said, if you want to know the temperature of the church, pastor, put the thermometer in your mouth. What's happening in you is going to happen in there. Don't talk to them about evangelism. If you're not evangelizing, everything is going to rise or it's going to fall. And what was so clear to me is that the only way to get where God wanted me to go was to be passionately growing for the rest of my life in my ability to influence and lead people. So now we come to what we're calling Heart for the World 2.0, all these years later. And maybe as much as ever, I am feeling the same kind of inadequacy. Okay, Dale, what you know is not enough for what I'm about to do. And right now, I'm jumping on growing like I've never tried to grow before. In the chapter, you'll read the story about um, Maurice and Dick McDonald, and it's a very interesting thing because these guys started this incredible fast food restaurant in the 1940s, and it was phenomenal because they were able to create a system for the kitchen and customer service. They're the first ones to ever use paper bags, hand people. They didn't have to come and sit on get a plate and silverware, and they were phenomenally successful. And people all over the country were asking them, how do you do that kitchen? You've got this kitchen system that just produces the same quality of food every time, you know. But as much as they thought, boy, we could franchise this, they could never make it happen until this guy named Ray Kroc come along, and he had done this, and through a whole process, it's just interesting. Uh, he bought the rights, and within just a few years, McDonald's became a global enterprise. What was the difference? They had all of these tools, but they lacked a few tools that would take it to the next level. Some of you know, and I'm just sharing my own background, that as the Lord began to speak about 2.0, He gave me that word about Colonel Sanders. At my age, he franchised Kentucky Fried Chicken, and he said, you know, the herbs and spices that Heart for the World has, they need to go to every city that you can get it to. It's you need to share this with the world. And I said, well, Lord, how do I do that? So this whole idea of scaling it and began to be this vision of campuses. And let me just share that, even though you all have heard it, but some who will be watching this. A few things the Lord spoke to me that was very clear. What I'm doing right now in your leadership for Heart for the World 2.0 is you're going to pastor a city, not just a church. And you can't just pastor this city from one location. You're going to have an influence way beyond what that building can hold, because I want to get what you're doing into Vado and to I-70 or wherever it was. The other thing the Lord showed me is you're going to leave a legacy, not just a ministry. I want you to spend this time in your life passing these batons on. So as we say, and as Heidi's ministry called, you don't grow a church, you grow an orchard. Um, the other thing I felt like he told me is there is an amazing opportunity here. You've done this for almost 50 years for other people to stand on your shoulders. There's an opportunity here for this church to be in the leadership that you have, to give people an amazing head start. And I've often told people when we planted Heart for the World, it's hard to believe, but yes, it took over 5 years before we could grow it to 200 people. And boy, those first years, and I might even share a little bit about Sunday. We had to restart the church 3 times. It started at 50, grew to 3. It just had to start over. And any of you who've started anything, you know what that's like. You're digging the foundation and everything about that. And I just felt like the Lord says, if you build 3 stories, you don't have to build a foundation again. And I want you to help people. They can start where you've come instead of starting where you had to start many years ago. So that's been the vision of the 2.0 and the campuses. And personally, what that's meant for me is I went back and said, okay, I'm going back to 1987. I got to start over because these same principles, the principles don't change. Math is math. Now, how you apply them has to change. And now you've got a new kind of project. How do you do this? To be honest, I don't know how. I mean, I'm learning, I'm learning. How do you pastor people, but you're not even in the building? And it's a whole new way of leading. And so I just felt like, wow, let's go back to the tools and let's relearn and apply them in new ways for what God's going to do in the next season of your life. And that's how I want to encourage you. There's a season that you're coming into, and God wants to help you lead in a greater way. And I hope that as I'm struggling to use these tools in a higher way, that it could help you all as well. So let's look at the course. There's 21 laws. I'm going to encourage you to read the first 6 chapters over. Our next class won't be next Friday because of Good Friday. Our next class will be in 2 weeks. If you know someone who wants to take it, there will be on that Wednesday night, a week from Wednesday night, this video will show. Sue will host this class in a discussion, especially made for pastors in the Philippines and other places. But what I'd love for you to do is, and I forgot one of the handouts, and I will send these to you. Michael, help me remember. But with each of these laws and these chapters, I also have a list of scriptures where stories in the Bible illustrate these laws. And that's mainly what I'm going to teach. I'm going to say, okay, here's these laws. Here's where they are in the Bible. And so I will send that list of scriptures. So after you read each chapter, you'll see it. We'll do that today with chapter 1 and a little bit with chapter 2. I was going to try to go over 3 a week, but I realized if we get to 2, that'll be amazing. Anyhow, there's so much in these laws. What I want you to do then is look at those scriptures, come prepared then, and then the big question we have as we begin to listen is to begin to personalize all of this. I hope you get an awareness of your leadership. Hey, Mike, welcome. Have a seat. There's some more things. I like to call, what I really hope you'll get is an awareness of your leadership lid. Where am I in these different areas, and what could I do to lift it? In that first chapter, what he says very clearly is, if the number 1 law is this law that very simply says, the law of the lid. Leadership ability is the lid that determines a person's effectiveness. The lower an individual's ability to lead, the lower the potential is. The more you lift your lid, the greater the influence and impact that you'll have is. In the book, he draws this scale, and I guess what it's trying to show you is the bottom line is how dedicated you are. How hard are you willing to work at your ministry or whatever it is? Here's somebody who works at a level 7, but who only has a level 2 leadership lid. They work as hard as they can, but the scope of their impact and influence is this much. Here is somebody else who has the same dedication, but they have grown their leadership up to a 6. They're influencing so much more, so many more people, so much more impact, and yet they're not working any harder. They're just influencing bigger. That's the idea of the law of the lid, that your leadership increases the impact that you can have in other people's lives. I see Heidi and Chris and the youth right now, and they have worked hard to train. How many leaders do you have? 7 or 8? The youth leaders?
Well, there's 20 of them trying.
Wow, 20. That's incredible. Well, I noticed that once you started raising those people up, everybody who comes gets welcomed a lot better at youth. Whereas if you try to welcome 80 youth, you don't do very good. So you can work twice as hard and have half as much impact, but by using leadership to raise up leaders, you have now accomplished 10 times as much as you could. So that's the whole principle. And that was the whole idea of Maurice and Dick McDonald. They worked as hard as they could. They had gifts. And yet, look at their influence compared to when Ray Kroc took over. And now it's in 100 nations and all of the rest. It's not because he works hard. It's because he led bigger. And so this is the that vision of the first principle. In talking just a bit of the law of the lid, we see how clearly everything rises and falls on leadership. And I put the scripture in there. This is the second page, but you can read in 1 Kings 14 and 15. And you've seen this in Israel before. They list the king, and you can tell the nation either rises or crashes, right? You get a good king, you get a Jehoshaphat, woo, God's moving. You get an Ahab, everything dies, So that's a clear picture of the law of the lid. One of the ones I wanted to focus on, and it's one of the scriptures, is, I believe, a very clear example of the law of the lid is in Saul and David. So let's just reflect. There's several verses we could look at regarding this. Mostly I'll just refer to them. But I'll give you the notes in the scriptures. You can look these up for themselves. Just a few observations between Saul and David. I think most people in here kind of are familiar with those stories. But outwardly, it would look like Saul had the most leadership potential. Remember, he was head and shoulders above everybody else. In other words, he was a natural leader. He was like, whoa, look at that guy. He walks in and he's got the swagger and he's the leader. David, on the other hand, was sort of the runt of the litter guy. He doesn't have impressive looks. He's not strong and powerful. He's not educated or anything else. But look where they end up. The greatest king in Israel's history and the greatest disaster of a king in Israel's history. I'm proposing that it all had to do with the lids. So here's some notes that you could observe. Number one, they both had these same kinds of things. They had counsel from godly men, Samuel. They both faced great challenges, and both of them had the same kind of choices. They could decide to grow, or they could decide to not grow. But look at how different. And so I just wanted to point out some of Saul's lids. Number one was fear. When he was called to be king, remember, he was hiding in the baggage. So he had a fear. He wouldn't face Goliath. How many know fear is number one lid if you're going to make a difference? He was impatient. Remember, he didn't want to wait for Samuel. He didn't want to wait for Samuel to offer the sacrifice, so he just went on his own. And he lived with impatience and denial. When Samuel tried to confront him, he said, "Oh, no, what's the sound of those sheep?" He says, "Oh, no, those are offerings to the Lord. I know that you said to kill all the sheep, but I'm just going to offer them later to the Lord." He just made excuses for his sins. He lived impulsively. Remember, uh, he almost had to kill Jonathan because he said, whoever eats anything in the next 24 hours is going to be killed. Until and Jonathan didn't hear it and goes and eats, and he was about to kill his own son. That's a little bit impulsive. He was deceitful. He offered his daughter Michal to David, actually just hoping that to get the prize, he would die in battle. Watch out for that kind of father-in-law. They're dangerous. Anyhow, jealousy, tried to kill David, anger. These all represented lids. So what happens? Does Saul lift those lids? No, we know he comes to this tragic ending. Whereas David, on the outside, David had a whole bunch of lids, right? His family didn't like him. He wasn't invited to the party. His brothers hated him, told him to go home, called him names. Even his wife later, when he tried to dance before the Lord, booed him. I mean, this guy had a lot of family issues. So you think, okay, David's not going to be a very great leader, right? His leader, Saul, tried to kill him. He had a background of poor shepherds. Time and again, he was underestimated and disrespected. But if you look at David's life, the end result was he continued to remove those lids and he lifted them and became an incredible leader. Here's just some observations I made about David. Number one, he really turned to God his heart when it came to rejection in his life. And I just want to encourage anyone, if you're going to lead high, you're going to have to deal with hurts and rejection in your life, because those wounds will keep you under a lid. I love how he said in Psalm 27:10, even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close. So he learned to find his identity and strength. He repented quickly and completely when Nathan confronted him. Can I just tell you right now, I'll tell you where your leadership lid is going. How do you do with confrontation and correction? How quickly can you admit it? How quickly can you say, wow, Lord, the fruit of the spirit of patience hasn't happened yet. I need to grow. This impatience is going to be a lid on me. I got to do something real quick here. That ability. He cultivated faith by spending time in God's presence, and he made bold choices in private. I mean, I just love the fact, I tell people all the time, how do you overcome fear? It's all action. You do something every day brave when you don't feel like it. You don't say, "Oh God, help me overcome my fear." No, when a lion tries to take your lambs, you go fight the lion. And he did all the things in secret that Saul didn't. And what happened? Every one of those secret choices resulted in the lid being lifted higher in his life. He developed faith. And then this is something I just wanted to lean in on, because I don't know, it's been something God's speaking to me a whole lot. And that is, David learned to find and grow in his own identity. I think one of the most interesting things in David's story is when he refused to wear Saul's armor. He knew who he was. He was comfortable in his own skin. He didn't do things to please Saul. He didn't say, "Well, Saul really wants me to wear his armor. I don't want to hurt his feelings." Because that's probably what I would have done. I would have tried to charge at an armor and tripped and fell and died. He was confident in what he could do. He knew the tools God gave him. Hey, I'm not going to kill this giant with the sword. I'm going to do it with a sling. That's my tools. That's my gift. If I have the gift of teaching, that's my gift. If I don't have the gift of teaching, I'm not going to pretend that I can teach, because other people won that way. And People, what I have found, often the lid is people who have borrowed identities. They're trying to be like someone, they're trying to live up to something rather than all the time that David spent differentiating who he was in God's presence. He knew who he knew, and he knew who he was, what his gifts were, what God called him to do, and he just didn't care what other people thought. Um, he could function well in first chair or fifth chair, didn't matter, you know. Let me just read this definition of differentiation by Pete Scazzaro. A differentiated person is someone who is well connected to people, yet does not allow their reactions or behaviors of other people to their behaviors to be determined by other people. They have a solid self. They resist the urges to act with a false self. They don't reflect what people want them to be or strive to have an idolized view of their own importance or image. They don't try to impress others. They are comfortable in their awareness of what they're called and gifted to do, and they don't rely on people's approval or affirmation. They can speak forthrightly and not just say what other people want to hear. They are comfortable with whatever role God has for them to play. Their focus is on hearing God say, "Well done," and they are therefore okay with being promoted or forgotten. They get their strength from who they are in their relationship with God. This security makes them able to focus on adding value to others rather than just thinking about themselves. This is so important in leadership because the responsibilities and criticism of leadership will destroy a fragile ego. In my own life, I found having a fragile ego will create a danger of overfunction. What am I talking about that? Because of a lack of solidness in my identity as a young pastor, I overfunctioned. I did everybody's job, never knew when to quit, never knew when to rest. I felt like the performance of the church was my identity. I couldn't have boundaries. I couldn't tell so and so, no, you're not gifted to be on the worship team, even though everybody held their ears while they were up there singing. I just couldn't get that strong enough. And to me, I would say that was the deepest continuing work in me in which I have seen God increase my influence. Not by doing more things outwardly, but by growing more secure inwardly. Does that make sense? That was just huge for me. Um, Let me just say this, and it's always okay to brag on your wife a little bit, but I've observed her because Sharon is a very unlikely leader. Yesterday, she went to visit someone in ICU and they wouldn't let her in. And I said, "You got to tell them you're a pastor." She says, "I don't care. I don't want anyone to know I'm a pastor." And I said, "I know, but you got to play that card." And she said, "Well, I'm a pastor." And they said, "No, you're not." You know? And she said, "Well, I'm sorry, I am. Do you want to call me?" Anyhow, she got in. But my point is, and he says this in the book, leadership is influence. It's not a way of looking. It's not a way of how you walk. It's not your smoothness. It's not how good of a salesperson you are. It's your ability to influence others. And I remember from the first time I met her, I was so impressed because uh, she's very, very quiet. You know that. In fact, some people nicknamed her Mouse in high school. Hey Mouse, because she looked like Mickey Mouse, I guess. But yet, all the other girls in her class tried to be like her. And I remember just looking at it. It was so weird. Like she started wearing overalls, and all these other girls in school started wearing overalls. She never tried. And of course, when she started a Bible study at Loretta High School, tons of people came and filled up the room. And I observed that over the years, and I believe with all my heart that the key point was that she's absolutely comfortable in her own skin. I don't need to be something. I could care less. Let me preach. Let me change diapers. It doesn't matter. And because she was willing to grow in that differentiation, in that security, what's the natural result? People want to follow her. People want to be influenced by her. This is so huge. Because of this, then we see the last thing I want to say about David as we get ready to discuss some things. Ultimately, David's biggest influence came because he was not only able to lift his lid, but he became a lid lifter. What distinguishes David is the mighty men. Someone said before David, there was no giant killers. But if you go on to read the story after David, there's like 100 giant killers. Everywhere you go, there's another giant killer. Now that is so significant because guess what? Bible says when the students are fully taught, they will be like their teacher. It doesn't say they will know what their teacher knows. It says they will have the impartation. And what David does, if you go ahead and read the story, we could do a whole course on David. And I said many years ago to say, this is the one person in the Bible I'm going to know the best other than Jesus. But every part of his story is he's lifting a lid off somebody. What's the result? If you go, and I'll give you the verses later, but you go to 2 Kings 5 or wherever it is, when David is anointed king, it says all of the tribes of Israel came to anoint him king. He didn't have to work on it. He was stayed in Hebron. He didn't have to convince anybody. And in the Message translation, it says, David, you have always been our king. And he never in any way had to say, well, vote for me, vote for me. No, everyone saw him because of what he imparted to them. Incredible. So let's just do the second law real quick and then we'll discuss it. The second law then is the law of influence. Perhaps you don't mind Mike just closing that door or something. We could just, maybe it won't distract, but the law of influence is leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. It doesn't depend on titles, personalities, decisions. Leaders can come in any size, any shape, any personality type. It has nothing to do with a title, or I'm going to say it doesn't even matter how many people follow you on Instagram. None of that says that you're a leader. And there's some very interesting leadership examples. For example, I'll just mention a few of them and I'll give you the scriptures later. Rahab was an amazing leader. And she was a prostitute. I mean, you talk about the most unlikely person, and yet she saves her whole family in Jericho. Why? Because she acted like a leader. She took action. She kept her word. The king of Nineveh, what a leader, man. When he repents, the whole nation repents. Don't you wish we had a leader like that? That guy has so much influence. If he repents, everyone, his whole family is automatically gonna just repent. I like Naaman's slave girl. Remember the little girl? And Naaman's the most powerful guy, and he says, hey, Naaman, there's a prophet named Elijah. You could be healed of your leprosy. You know, this little girl, and yet she influences the king. One of the things I want to add here, and we'll talk more about it, but leadership is also not top down. It can be top down, but we talk about the 360-degree leader. What does that mean? A leader can lead down, they can lead, horizontally, or they can lead up. If you're a true leader, you actually influence your leader. You don't even have to have the title. The leader is going to come to you all the time because he knows when he listens to you, you're going to get better. What I want to help you think of is to forever take out of your mind, okay, I'm going to this meeting today, but I'm not the leader. So today I'm just going to slouch back here, act bored, and do nothing because I'm not leading. No, I'm sorry. You're always leading. The only question is, are you leading well? Are you leading poorly? If you sit in the back and start to look bored, guess what? You just influenced everybody on that row to be bored. That's why I just love to challenge people in leadership. Hey, sit close to the front. Your littlest twitch to praise the Lord is going to influence somebody on that row to praise the Lord. I can almost guarantee if I can get 10 leaders on the front row, the whole room changes. Because what they do, others follow. If they're expecting God to move, all of a sudden the whole crowd is just expecting God to move. So I guess that's such an powerful thought in my mind, is that leadership is influence. In his later edition, in this edition, he talks about Princess Diana, but in his later one, he speaks a lot more about Mother Teresa. And if you've ever studied her, and again, I'm old enough to remember her, and I just will never forget, she is asked to speak at the United Nations. And I'll never forget Hillary, and Bill Clinton are right there on the front row. And she's like, whatever, 4'11" or something like that, hunchback, dressed in the most humble attire. But here's a woman who her ministry, she not only raised up an incredible organization, Mothers of Charity, but she reproduced it all over the world. And today there are thousands of chapters. And whereas almost every other kind of what you call it, the Catholic Church groups, or they almost all are in decline, but hers has never stopped growing. More and more people still today, after she's been dead 6 years, still are joining her movement than any other movement in the Catholic Church. Just phenomenal, So that's what I call a leader. But if you saw her, you would think there is nothing leader about her. And then she spins to speak, and the whole United Nations, these presidents, they're all on the edge of their seat. Mother Teresa, she's saying good things, love your neighbor, everybody's cheering. And then all of a sudden, I'll just never forget this moment. She looks at everybody just as straight as she can and says, you know what the biggest threat to peace today is? Abortion. And how dare you allow the killing of these babies as law in your country? I mean, she's just like, pfft. And I'll never forget seeing Bill and Hillary going, oh, yeah, just kind of melting back there. Incredible. But you know what? She could say it, and she got a standing ovation. Why? It's the law of influence. She had paid all the prices on the inside so that when she spoke, everybody listened. So I want us to think of that, because wherever you are and whatever you're doing, your influence could get better. Being a leader does not mean you have more knowledge. How many have ever taken a class from a professor that was absolutely brilliant, but you wouldn't follow them to the bathroom? I mean, they're just like, oh yeah, good. I'm glad you're smart. I don't really care. You know what I'm saying? It is not how personally rich you can be. Very wealthy doesn't mean you're a leader. You can be successful. That it could mean you're a great salesman, but that doesn't mean you're a leader. You could have the highest position. How many have known so many people? They have the position, but nobody's following. So that was the great quote there by John Maxwell. It says, he who thinks he leads, but no one follows, is just taking a walk. I love that phrase. Okay. So there's a lot of people with big titles that are just taking a walk. I wouldn't follow that guy for anything, And then there's very humble people. They might be carrying a mop, but people are watching and wanting to be influenced by them. And I want us to hear that, because that will change everything. Eliab was the brother of David. Everyone thought he was the leader, but God said, don't look on man's outer appearance. What is leadership? It's your heart. It's all these choices that you make on the inside that create a magnet for God with the people that you're around on the outside. If you develop these long enough, people are always watching you. You can't go to a restaurant without somebody's watching you. For me, it's kind of difficult because there's nowhere I can go in Las Cruces where someone doesn't come up to me. Hey, Pastor Dale, so I got to be careful everywhere. But the point is, you don't have to ever announce that you're a leader. You either are one or you aren't one. So here's what is a leader. It's someone who influences people to make a positive difference in their life. Someone with character, wisdom, and has the ability to make positive connections, add value, and influence other people so they want to work together to create things bigger than themselves. So let me just affirm what I see in these chapters as some of the top indicators that you're a positive influencer. Number one, you're differentiated. You don't wear Saul's armor. In other words, you know you've done the hard heart work to say, God, I know what I'm supposed to do in life. You know your purpose. And it doesn't matter. You don't have to have a title to do it. You're not going to be one bit better if you're titled or not. By the grace of God, when I'm no longer the pastor of this church, I hope it makes no difference. I have the same amount of influence because it never had to do with a position in the first place. It always is a reflection of your heart for people. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. We've all known the difference between people who love to teach and people who love the people they teach. I was preparing a message the other day, and it was kind of me and the Lord talking, and I said, Lord, I don't know if I'm qualified to teach. And it was just an interesting question because the question I felt he asked me didn't make any sense. He said, Dale, how much do you love those people? I said, I really do. I really like them. I mean, I get excited. I'd like to see their kids play baseball. He said, okay, you're qualified to teach. Because you won't influence them then because you're so smart, because you're not. But if they feel, man, he's for me, she's for me, nobody wants success for me more than them, you're a leader. People will listen to you and people will follow you. You make a positive impact by being action-oriented. Very quickly, leaders act. Followers wait for someone to act. Or they watch people act, and leaders act. And it's one of the things John Maxwell says that I love. He said this changed his life when he was in his 20s because he would be a lot of philosophizing on this. This guy challenged him 300 times a day to say this before he got out of bed for 30 days. And this is what he said: do it now, do it now, do it now, do it now, do it now. He said after 30 days, it changed his life. Why? Because he became a person of action. If he thought of writing a card, do it now. If he noticed there was an opportunity to share his faith, he didn't say, well, that's an interesting thought, I'm going to journal about that next week. You just do it. If you felt convicted that you need to apologize, you do it now. And I thought that was an incredibly valuable key to leadership. They relentlessly add value to others. They empower. And that's why you can always lead, because every relationship you have, you're either a plus, a zero, or a minus. If you could just gauge that one thing. All right, I ran into so-and-so in the hall today after church, and we chatted for about 2 minutes. Was I a plus, or was I a zero, or was I a minus? Was I just like, oh yeah, I'm into myself, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I'll forget that in 3 seconds. That's what they'll say. Or did I find at least one thing to say to them that said, oh, they have a value to me. Oh, okay. I feel a little bit stronger. This is this awareness. And I just want to challenge you this week with your kids, with anybody else. Just constantly try to dial in. I believe self-awareness accelerates your growth more than anything. The people who grow the most are the people who can see how they do things. They're self-aware. They can say, when I left that conversation, I think I left them feeling a little bit small because I talked too much. Aha, there's a leader in the making, because they have enough self-awareness to say, man, if I would have listened a little more, I would have raised their level of value a little bit more. Pray about that and say, Lord, how do I do that in everyone I meet? They have an ability to build teams. It's not what you can do, it's how many others start to do what you do, and then you help them work together to do it. It's the ultimate sign of a leader. You can be a great worker, but if you're a leader, somehow you get other people working together. And you always think of that way. I remember this little story about this little boy, and I just loved it. His dad had given him a job, and it was way too big for him to do. And he had to move these big branches, and he only had about an hour to go. And his dad comes and he says, "How's it coming?" He says, I can't do it, Dad. I've done my best. I've done everything I can. I'm not going to finish this job. And his dad says, "You haven't done your best." And the boy says, "I have done my best, Dad. I swear I've done my best." He said, "No, you haven't done your best. You never asked me to help. You tried to do it by yourself." See, you're not a leader if you don't ever ask anyone to help you, because you haven't multiplied yourself in that situation. They can make a difference no matter what seat on the bus they're sitting in, whether they're driving or in the back. And then one of the most powerful signs of a lid lifter is, and I don't have time to read it, but you'll read it in Law 3. Leadership develops daily, not in a day. It's called the law of process. And that is the law that says leaders are learners. They are relentlessly pressed and passionate about getting better. They're never satisfied, even though they're content, but they're not satisfied. They're always asking the same question: how could I do that better? How could I do that better? How could I do that better? They continually learn from every place and every experience that they can. So for our discussion, if you want to just talk for a second, maybe Mike can join the table here, but just talk about this a little bit and ask the question, which of the lids mentioned today in Saul or David's life could you maybe identify with, that could, if you let it, could be a lid in your life? Maybe you had a tough family or whatever it was. In what way do these first two laws challenge you to be something you could use to grow and help you lift the influence that you're having with other people? And in what way have you learned to be aware of the influence you're having on people like your family? And what tools could you take away from this first two laws that could help you raise even 1% your influence on your family this week? So those are some thoughts.